So last night was the season finale of this season of The White Lotus, and I'll tell you this, I did not see those twists coming. I think it's fair to say it's been a slow burn of a season of The White Lotus. I think maybe the best season, but I don't know about that ending. The group chat's here, they have thoughts. Let's get to it. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, hit it. Yeah, that's the way you gotta start. I do kind of wish that the White Lotus theme song would just follow me around wherever I go. Listen, season 3 ended yesterday. This is a show that has a lot to say about people with power and people with money. Today we're going to talk about last night's season finale and also the entire season overall. Michelle Cho is here. Jackson Weaver is here. Hello to both of you.
Hey there.
Hello. It's nice to have you. I'm going to give people a heads up. We're going to be spoiling some things. We're going to be spoiling some things in this conversation. So I'm going to give people a minute to pause the podcast or pause the video if you're watching us on YouTube. Just smash your radio if you're listening to us on radio, because there's a lot happened and I don't think we can not talk about it. I'm someone who I liked this season of The White Lotus. I was kind of all in on these characters, all in on these tensions in general. And then in the last few minutes of the season finale, some of it fell apart for me. Namely, I didn't know if I was looking for a gigantic shootout. Having said that, I am not the one who has opinions here. You two are the ones with opinions here. Jackson, I'm going to start with you. We get the slow burn of a season, story-wise, and then we get to that finale. How'd you feel about that finale?
I mean, everyone's talking about the slow burn. I started watching White Lotus for this show and watching all the seasons. I watched half of season 3, all of season 1, finished season 3, and now I'm going back through season 2. So I'm in a very strange way to go about it. But
you're not living the normal experience that everybody else is living with White Lotus. But yes.
But seeing it in such a quick fashion, I think I'm getting a hyper specific and upfront loaded aspect of what all the seasons are like, and they're fine. I think it's very kind of a literary way to tell a story. It ratchets up the tension all the way through until it finally releases it at the end. You have all these disparate different storylines that are more about the central theme that maybe we'll get to. I have theories about what it is, and then you all release it in that final moment, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there should have been shootouts every episode. I am a fan of this finale. I think they did a really good job of wrapping it up there.
Wow. Different ends of the spectrum in terms of relationship to the shootout, but that's okay. I'll reserve my thoughts for a moment. Michelle, over to you. What are your thoughts on the finale?
So it's I feel as ambivalent as one can, I think.
Okay.
Because,
get in there.
Yeah, because it was technically brilliant. I mean, every element of the music, cinematography, pacing, editing, acting, which has been just so phenomenal this whole time. We're all A++, but narratively, it is, for me, a series of letdowns. So, yeah, those two things. It's like when you have an assignment and you are doing great on everything but kind of the content. It's a little bit of a problem. So I don't know. It had a lot to do, but can I give it a B-? That's, I think.
Wow, that's a fair first of all, I think that's a low. I think that's a low grade. Okay,
no grade inflation here.
let me pick up on what Jackson was saying. The idea that this is a pretty literary show, because I think that's true, and that's why I think people embrace it and have a relationship with it. I think Carrie Coon's character, Laurie, had this monologue in the finale that, in theory, should have been the climax of the show. In theory, this was the thesis of the show. She's tearful, and she's like, this vacation wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I tried religion, didn't work out for me. I tried, paying attention to work, it didn't work out for me. I tried love, it didn't work out for me. But then I realized I have time, and I have you guys. You've had these two friends my entire life. And just the very fact of our endurance says something about our presence in each other's lives, And this is a really beautiful monologue that is kind of about waking up and recognizing the thing that you've had all along and the value of that. And you see that kind of play out in the Ratliff family, who are oh, we have each other. Things are going to go real badly in just a moment, but we at least have each other. You know, there's a parallel to Walton Goggins' character, Rick, who suddenly realizes he actually had everything that he needed in front of him the whole time, and he just didn't use it. But tragically, that ends in his death. This is a great thesis, but the way that you go about executing that thesis, I'm not sure that they built the scaffolding for that throughout the whole rest of the season. Is that what you're reacting to, Michelle? This idea that, like, okay, you've arrived at a point, but you didn't really signal to me that you're getting here. Is that your problem?
I think it's related. I think that there's this kind of like cynicism plus, like, I don't know, all of a sudden a humanistic ending at the end. And that's what I wasn't quite prepared for, maybe. Like, you haven't really given us too many indications that that's kind of what you want us to take away.
You have to earn
so then when it came around, yeah, you have to earn that kind of, you know, epiphany or like real meaning, finding meaning in the midst of a lot of meaninglessness. So yeah, that was, but I think you summed it up really well.
I'll tell you the moment that you get to see a character sort of confront finding meaning is Patrick Schwarzenegger's character, and there's this lovely moment where Saxon suddenly sees that, like, he actually wants what Rick and Chelsea have, and to his credit, Patrick's acting on the beach as he gets a little bit tearful looking at them. I actually kind of buy that a little bit, Jackson. But what do you think? Do you think this thesis was earned? Do you think this finale gave us a payoff that is kind of earned from the rest of the season?
I mean, I absolutely think so. What it reminds me most of is the book Skippy Dies by Paul Murray, in which the very first scene of the book, this kid named Skippy dies. And then the whole rest of the book is about how these other cast of characters, it goes back and tells you how they were all involved in it. And it also goes to the idea of, like, what does life mean? There's many worlds theory, all this sort of things. I think that this show, the thesis is know thyself plus bad decisions make good stories. And everyone in this show is trying to understand who they are. The Ratliffs, can they live without money? Can they be normal people? Lachlan maybe could, the rest of them could not. Is Chelsea able to save Walton Goggins' character as the light versus the dark? Are there's three friends able to, go past what they identify or present as themselves to, like, identify with one another? And I think the cheap way to make that all land would be the people that accept themselves and know thyself have a happy ending, the people that don't have a sad ending. But I think that there is this cynicism there that nothing really matters. We're never able to truly know ourselves. And even if you go to a Buddhist temple and pray your unidentified, identity as a man or a Thai woman away, you're never going to find true meaning. And I like that cynicism, and I like the message, if it is the message, that there is no happy ending and we're never going to know ourselves, and everything is crazy and messed up, and there's going to be a shootout that doesn't mean anything in the end.
Oh, wow. I got to tell you, confronting meaninglessness from the White Lotus at 9 p.m. on a Sunday is different than confronting it from Jackson Weaver on the radio in the morning. I think
I'm going to hit you over the head with cynicism.
It categorically feels a little bit different. Let's talk about the casting. Let's talk about the casting of this season, because I do think that they played to a lot of the strengths of these characters, whether it's Saxon, played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, the return of also Spawn manager Belinda from season 1, played by Natasha Rothwell. And then you get the humble, yet kind of ambitious, but maybe not sure whether he wants to be ambitious, Guy Talk, played by Tame Tap Tip Tong. Jackson, whose storyline did you find the most compelling?
Most compelling, I think, Jason Isaacs' Timothy, because that's really the plot engine. That's the Chekhov's gun, really, with him and Guy Tag driving the show along. The one that I'm most, though, like, interested in was Lachlan, as kind of a parallel to, remember the first season Quinn, the, like, younger son who really does kind of accept himself.
Yeah,
and he goes from being this kind of incel kid to being this guy that wants to, like, live authentically in Hawaii. And Lachlan is a similar but opposite, where he keeps trying to worship his older brother, and he ends up taking that protein powder at the end, which is kind of the punishment. I really like those two, that, like, synergistic plot there. Although, I mean, we can't not love Carrie Coon. Come on now.
I was like, gotta say, he's trying to do a little bit more than worship his brother, if you know what I'm saying. Michelle, what about you? What's your favorite character?
Well, so I fell in love with Parker Posey's Victoria in the beginning. And so I was really on board with this idea that maybe her sedated housewife act was, like, all a cover because she was Tim's whistleblower, perhaps. So I was like, ooh, maybe that'll come out.
That would have been good.
Wow.
I know, but no. And but I mean, I was most rooting for Guy Talk and Mook, the locals.
Yeah. And that story, I mean, like, you go, that's a happy ending, but he had to kill someone to get to that place. It's a bit, and so there's a grim meaninglessness to that, which makes Jackson happy and makes everybody else kind of a little bit unhappy. Look, one of the big moments of the season was this monologue that came from this exchange between Rick, played by Walter Goggins, and his good pal Frank, played by Sam Rockwell, who gave us this confession.
I moved here because, I had to leave the States, but I picked Thailand because I always had a thing for Asian girls, The form of this cute Asian girl, why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me. Is she gonna complete me in some way? I realized I could f*** a million women, I'd still never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Michelle, The White Lotus is a show that, enjoys the tensions between America's white, wealthy elite and the locals wherever they go, where they're trying to exploit. This season is set in Thailand, and with all that in mind, I'm curious what you made of that moment in season 3, what that got you thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, that was a moment where I got a sense, first of all, that maybe Mike White is not aware that some of us who are hailed by that label, the Asian girl, might also be watching the show. And so it was a estranging moment for me, because I was like, oh, whoa, I'm being kind of presented here with this vision of the world where I don't have the option to kind of let go of my identity and transform. I'm fixed in my identity. Whereas, the characters that were given some depth from Mike White about are all kind of in his subject position. So that was weird. But yeah, it was also, though, the kind of moment too where I think the show is committing to its bit of like, we are here to show you how the ugly American stereotype, which is something that was developed in Southeast Asia, right? In the post-war 20th century, it hasn't changed all that much, right? So what does it mean for us to kind of like revisit that now? And of course, we didn't know that Trump was doing his best to be the ugliest American possible, when this season was in the works. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, who gets to detach their identity and kind of transform, gives us a big window into what worldview this show is presented from. And so that's something we should consider.
Jackson, I want to acknowledge two things. One, the conversation about that monologue has kind of shifted a little bit this weekend. And one of the things that shifted about it is that Mike White, there was a clip of him on Andrew Sullivan's podcast where he talked about the Sam Rockwell character as someone who has, quote, autogynephilic tendencies or fantasies. And you heard a lot of trans critics say using that phrasing actually suggests to us that Mike White is at least in conversation with this worldview that says trans women are actually just men who have fantasies of having sex with themselves, and this viewpoint being kind of a harmful one. I wish we had a trans critic on this panel, but this panel was booked before because we didn't know what, you don't know what kind of clip is going to come out over the weekend. So just want to acknowledge that. But two, the other thing that came out this weekend is that Carrie Coon said that her character, Lori, had a kid who was non-binary, and that storyline was cut after Trump's election. Mike White decided to cut that because it felt a little bit too political. So just with those two stories in mind, I just got to ask you, how lightly do you think the show wears its politics? Because I think it's easy to say this is a show about class politics, but I do see it pulling its punches in places where it could be a bit more explicit. I think we credit it with being a pretty political show. Is that credit deserved, do you think?
I think that it's able to criticize a very specific type of person, which is this rich white person who is trying to find meaning in their life and going about it through all of these reductive ways and romanticizing poverty and not engaging with the kind of places, locales that they go to, even though they tell themselves they are.
Yeah.
But when you're able to so aptly criticize maybe what you know as Mike White, a person who is white himself, if you're reaching outside of that pool to take experiences from other groups to use them as fodder, that's when it starts to get more shallow and more reductive and maybe more insulting in a lot of ways. I think that he does, as was said before, he does an excellent job of just taking apart who Sam Rockwell is as a person and using it as maybe a commentary on who Walton Goggins thinks he is. But in doing that, by borrowing trans language or trans ideas that he doesn't understand and also, from these locales in Thailand that he also maybe does not fully understand. You are stepping outside of the real thesis of the show, and it's really starting to cut its knees out from under it. So I love how he reduces and takes down these specific characters. But yeah, that lingo, it's especially with that added explanation over the weekend, it starts to get a little bit more thin.
Yeah, I think that my curiosity has always been, Michelle, about whether we are giving White Lotus enough criticism for satirizing the white tourists who end up going to Hawaii, or the white tourists who end up going to Thailand, or the very rich people who end up going to Italy. But then there's something kind of meaningful about whether, because I think like the thing that makes satire work is if you keep your focus razor sharp. And I think this season, people maybe felt, you're trying to go a little bit too broad, and in doing so, you're losing the sharpness that made the show so good in season 1 or season 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this season and its setting in Thailand, for me, it kind of exposed some of the parochialness maybe of its worldview, or that's the first time that I kind of felt it come out, because in a Southeast Asian context, you're going to have tons of like non-white, non-American rich people wandering around a resort like the White Lotus, but this world is so narrowly construed. So yeah, I think that it has gotten a lot of credit for its kind of like class critique, but can it deal with like the world, the global, or like, looking beyond just class as the vector of difference? I don't think so. So it's really a kind of specific American take on the world, which I guess we're starting to see blown up and expanded, and that's great. But I don't think that the show intended to do that.
Having said that, the shot that really sticks with me is Belinda on the boat having gotten $5 million, and so she's sort of driving away, her and her son, and waving to someone with whom she promised to start a spa with, and then abandoning that promise in order to get on the boat and return to a pretty comfortable life. She's the one who was left in season 1. She is the one who's doing the leaving in season 3. Sometimes power and money can corrupt you pretty quickly, it turns out. And in the case of Belinda, it did so in about half an episode flat. And so that was quite a sort of striking resolution there. We got to leave it there, even though there's so much more to talk about. I gotta let you guys go. But thank you for being here, and thank you for your time, you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for processing with me.
Yes, of course. Jackson Weaver, senior writer at CBC Entertainment. He was in Toronto. Michelle Cho is a professor with the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Toronto. You can stream the entire 3rd season of The White Lotus right now on Crave. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, so back in 2011, I remember this story where H&M released this online campaign, and they used their heads of real models, but they photoshopped them onto computer-generated mannequins. Back then, that did not really go over that well with people, but now 14 years later, H&M is getting into artificial intelligence. The Swedish fast fashion company is working with 30 models to make, quote, digital twins. The twist here is that the models will own the rights to their own twin, and they can let other brands actually use them as well. Sinead Bovell is a futurist and former model, and she's got a lot of thoughts on this. Sinead, welcome back to the show, friend.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, of course. Listen, let's start with, how do you feel? How do you feel about H&M's approach here, casting 30 models, working with them to create these digital twins?
Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 answers. So the first part of that question is, technically H&M would seem to be doing the ethical thing. They're giving the fashion models the right to their digital twins. They can go off and use that in other places. And it technically gives models more assets to go on and earn more. That productivity boost we hear about in AI, this is precisely that type of an example. You can be in 6 photo shoots at once. Right. My more honest take is that H&M, this is the path to slowly introducing the world to AI-generated fashion models, AI-generated content, and seeing AI content more broadly in H&M's visible assets and material. And so H&M is kind of doing a soft launch with digital twins. They can kind of go under the guise of we're doing this ethically, and then they can test the waters. It didn't go so well when Levi's went live to air without any ethical guardrails on their AI model approach. But in time, we'll probably see more AI-generated fashion models more broadly. So we're going to get used to seeing that AI first look, and then eventually we might stop asking, is that a digital twin, and just assume that it's all AI. That is my intuitive instinct. That's not necessarily backed by data. I have no insight into what H&M's plans are, but that's what I think.
No, listen, I trust your instinct on this because it's a world that you've been spending time in for some time. We heard Matilda Gaverliani, one of the models participating in this project. She said her digital twin is, quote, like me without the jet lag, which is an interesting quote. H&M said it doesn't know what kind of impact this is going to have on other fashion workers, including hairstylists or makeup artists and photographers. Sinead, what do you think? Do you think they actually don't know what kind of impact that's going to have on those workers? You think that's true?
I think we do know. I think it would be probably a better statement would be that it's maybe creating jobs in different areas like AI prompting and kind of editing and more digital-based jobs. But if you are replicating a fashion model digitally, you don't need the makeup artist, you don't need the hairstylist, you don't need the producer. So I think that the answer to that is pretty obvious. It's probably H&M doesn't feel that they need to answer that question because they're focused more on the fashion models. But I think we can all probably interpret, where's there room for a makeup artist? Maybe there's a world in which the makeup artist gives direction in terms of prompting. And I could actually see that as a potential path because they would know, the face and makeup better. But I think it's pretty obvious that those jobs get automated as well.
Yeah, when I heard that their statement is we don't know how this is going to work out, I was like, I feel like we can sort of see that the idea that if you're just going to end up having people creating AI models and entire AI shoots out of these models, then I think we have a pretty clear answer here. It is worth mentioning that the New York State has created the Fashion Workers Act to better protect the models and other workers in the industry. Comes into effect in June, includes some protections around AI. How much of a difference do you think that's going to make?
I think that the act is the right thing. It should have passed a lot sooner. I know that they worked really hard to get that through.
Yeah.
I think it will help in some ways in terms of the contracts that models will sign from here on in. We'll have to be a lot more intentional and thoughtful around digital rights and ownership over digital assets. And the challenging part is modeling has historically been such an exploitative industry. It's structurally similar to acting, but models were not allowed to unionize in the United States. And so over time, when all of those conversations about actors, their digital rights, the strike should have also been happening in fashion, but there was no attention paid. So all of these AI-generated modeling, the actual physical models or the actual digital models, they've already been trained on millions of images of fashion models without any consent. And so their AI-generated capabilities will be sufficient as it is.
Right.
And so why this gets more complex with H&M is even though they're using digital twins, it's still improving H&M's AI generation capabilities over the medium to long term.
Right. And when you think about the fact that you saw this coming, you were predicting that the AI models would overtake fashion way back in 2020 when very few people were having this conversation. Have there been any surprises for you on how this has unfolded? I got about like a minute left here.
I would say just the speed at which artificial intelligence is moving at. It is now completely unreasonable to think that we can detect when something is AI generated and when we can detect that it's a real human.
Yeah.
But I think the data was pretty obvious back in 2020 that these capabilities would eventually surface. What I wasn't entirely sure of is the time and how the public would respond. It is still possible that the public doesn't like this and it doesn't stick.
When you say the public, you mean the industry?
Just consumers. People don't want to feel tricked. They don't want to feel like beauty is now actually entirely generated digitally.
Yeah.
So it is possible that this doesn't land, but I'm not too sure. That's what I can't predict.
Well, Sinead, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that you saw this coming way before anybody else did. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Sinead Bovell is a founder of a tech education company called Way. She's also a former model and futurist from Guelph, Ontario, and is now based in New York City. That is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. If you got a minute, find us on Instagram. We are at Commotion CBC. We're going to see you tomorrow.